The whistle of the approaching train pierced the crisp morning air as Sarah Sullivan clutched her small valise with white-knuckled hands. The Sweetwater Station platform stood nearly empty at this early hour, save for a few drowsy travelers and the stationmaster arranging mail sacks. October 1883 had brought an early chill to Wyoming territory, and Sarah pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, hoping it would conceal the bruise blooming beneath her left eye. "One way to Denver," she said softly, sliding her last few dollars across the ticket counter. Her voice trembled despite her efforts to sound confident. The elderly ticket agent peered at her over wire-rimmed spectacles. "Denver's a mighty big place for a young lady traveling alone," he remarked, counting her coins. "You got family there?" Sarah offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, sir. My aunt." The lie came easier than she expected. There was no aunt, no family waiting, just the desperate hope of disappearing into a city large enough to hide her from Thomas Blackwell, the man she'd fled from in the dead of night. "Train arrives in 10 minutes. Be boarding shortly after." He pushed the ticket toward her with gnarled fingers. Sarah nodded her thanks and retreated to the far end of the platform, where a wooden bench sat beneath the overhang. As she lowered herself onto the splintered seat, her side ached, another reminder of why she couldn't stay in Sweetwater. 3 months of marriage had taught her that Thomas's charming courtship had been nothing but a cruel mask. The platform began filling with more passengers as the train's approach grew louder. Sarah kept her head down, recognizing several townspeople she'd served at the general store before her hasty marriage. If anyone reported seeing her to Thomas, she shuddered at the thought. The locomotive finally came into view, belching black smoke against the pale morning sky. Sarah rose, clutching her ticket and the small bag containing everything she hadn't been forced to leave behind. Freedom was minutes away if she could just board without incident. "Sarah!" The deep voice froze her in place, her heart seizing. Not Thomas, no, this voice was different. She turned slowly to see a tall figure striding purposefully toward her. Dustin Drake moved through the crowd with the ease of a man accustomed to making his own path. His worn leather boots hardly made a sound despite his considerable height and broad shoulders. The silver star pinned to his vest caught the morning sunlight, the badge of Sweetwater's newly appointed deputy sheriff. "Miss Sullivan," he corrected himself, removing his hat as he approached. His eyes, the color of sun-warmed whiskey, widened slightly as they took in her face. "The bruise." Sarah turned her head, too late. "It's Mrs. Blackwell now," she reminded him stiffly, though the name felt like poison on her tongue. "Is there something you need, Deputy Drake?" "Seems there is." His voice dropped lower, for her ears alone. "Seems I need to understand why Thomas Blackwell's wife is boarding a train with a ticket to Denver and no husband in sight." Sarah's fingers tightened around her valise handle. "My personal affairs are none of your concern." "Perhaps not." Dustin's gaze lingered on her partially concealed bruise. "But when a woman I've known since school days suddenly appears with marks that shouldn't be there, it becomes my concern." The train whistle blew again as it pulled into the station, wheels screeching against iron rails. Passengers began to cluster near the edges of the platform. "Please," Sarah whispered, desperation creeping into her voice. "I need to board that train." Dustin studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a swift motion that startled her, he plucked the ticket from her trembling fingers. "Denver," he read aloud, then looked back at her. A muscle worked in his jaw. "I'm afraid this isn't the right ticket, Sarah." Her heart plummeted. "What do you mean? I just purchased it." "This ticket," he said, holding it between 2 fingers, "is to my arms, the safest place in Sweetwater." Sarah stared at him in confusion and growing anger. "Return my ticket immediately, Deputy. That train is my only chance." Your only chance? His voice softened. Sarah, running won't solve this. Thomas will just follow. Men like him always do. And what would you have me do? She hissed, tears threatening. Go back to him? Let him finish what he started last night. The raw pain in her words seemed to strike Dustin like a physical blow. He stepped closer, towering over her, but his presence felt protective rather than threatening. No, he said firmly. Never that. I'm offering you another way. All aboard, called the conductor from the nearest car. All aboard for Cheyenne and Denver. Passengers began moving forward, jostling around them. Sarah's panic mounted as she watched her escape route preparing to depart. Please, she begged, reaching for the ticket. You don't understand. Dustin captured her outstretched hand, gently but firmly. His calloused palm was warm against her cold fingers. I understand more than you know, he said. Thomas Blackwell has been terrorizing you behind closed doors, while pretending to be a respectable businessman to the rest of town. Sarah's breath caught. How did you? I've been watching him, gathering evidence. That's why I took the deputy position 3 weeks ago. This revelation stunned her. The position had been vacant for months, and Dustin Drake had been the last person she'd expected to fill it. He'd always been a loner, a skilled horseman who occasionally did breaking work for ranches but mostly kept to himself on his small homestead outside town. Evidence? For what purpose? She asked, even as the conductor called the final boarding. To bring charges against him. To end his reign in Sweetwater. Dustin's eyes held hers. But I need your testimony, Sarah. I need you to be brave enough to stand against him. The train whistle blew a final warning. Sarah looked desperately toward the passenger cars, then back at Dustin's resolute face. He'll kill me, she whispered. Not while I draw breath, Dustin vowed. You have my word. As the train began to pull away, Sarah felt tears spilling down her cheeks. Her escape was leaving without her, and she stood rooted to the platform with nothing but a deputy's promise between her and Thomas's rage when he discovered her failed attempt. Trust me, Dustin said quietly, still holding her hand. Just this once. Sarah's mind raced through her limited options. She could stay and face Thomas's wrath, or place her faith in this man, a man she'd known distantly her entire life but never truly known at all. The train's last car disappeared around the bend, taking with it her carefully planned escape. Where would I go? She asked finally, her voice barely audible above the diminishing sound of the departing train. Somewhere safe, Dustin answered. Somewhere he won't think to look. With one fluid motion, he tucked her ticket into his vest pocket and offered his arm. Let's get you away from this platform before anyone reports back to him. Sarah hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his forearm. His solidity was reassuring, so different from Thomas's deceptive gentility that masked explosive violence. The sheriff's office? She questioned as Dustin guided her down the platform steps. No, that's the first place Thomas would look. Dustin led her toward the livery stable at the edge of town. We're taking the back roads out to my place. It's remote enough that he won't come looking without cause. Alarm flared within her. Your homestead? I can't, it wouldn't be proper. Nothing about this situation is proper, Sarah. He cut in gently. But I give you my word as a lawman and as a man that you'll come to no harm under my protection. They reached the livery, where a sturdy bay gelding was already saddled. Dustin must have anticipated her agreement or perhaps prepared for either outcome. He secured her small valise behind the saddle, then turned to her. Can you ride? Yes, she answered. My father taught me before he passed. Dustin nodded, then surprised her by effortlessly lifting her onto the saddle. I'll walk alongside for now. Once we're clear of town, I'll climb up behind. As they left Sweetwater behind, Sarah felt a strange mixture of terror and relief. She'd missed her train to Denver, placed her trust in a man she barely knew, and would face Thomas's fury if he found her. Yet somehow, with each step of the horse carrying her away from town, the iron bands of fear around her chest began to loosen. Perhaps Deputy Drake truly could protect her. Perhaps, just this once, her trust wouldn't lead to betrayal. The morning sun climbed higher as they traveled, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. The distant mountains wore the first dusting of snow on their peaks, a silent reminder that winter would soon grip this wild territory. Like Dustin promised, once they were a good distance from town, he swung up behind her in one fluid motion that spoke of a lifetime spent in the saddle. His presence at her back was solid but respectful, his arms reaching around her only to hold the reins. "It's about 2 more hours to my place," he explained. "The trail gets rougher ahead." Sarah nodded, acutely aware of his proximity. 3 months ago, before her hasty marriage to Thomas, such closeness to an unmarried man would have been scandalous. Now it seemed the least of her concerns. "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. Dustin was quiet for so long she wondered if he'd heard her. Then his deep voice rumbled from behind her. "Because no one helped my mother." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Sarah knew little about Dustin's past, only that he'd arrived in Sweetwater as a boy of 12 with a worn-looking woman who'd taken work as a laundress. His mother had died when he was 15, and he'd somehow managed to stay on, working odd jobs and eventually building his small homestead. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "It was a long time ago." His tone suggested otherwise. "But some lessons stay with you." They rode in silence for another mile before Sarah gathered courage to ask, "How did you know? About Thomas? I mean," Dustin's sigh stirred the loose tendrils of hair at her neck. "Men like Thomas Blackwell don't change their nature, they just hide it better as they gain power. I've been watching him since he arrived in Sweetwater 2 years ago." "But you never said anything," Sarah observed. "Would you have believed me?" There was no accusation in his question, only quiet certainty. "Thomas was charming, wealthy, respected. I was just the loner who lived outside town." Sarah couldn't deny the truth in his words. When Thomas had begun courting her after her father's death last year, his attention had seemed like salvation. The general store her father had built was drowning in debt, and Sarah had been desperate to keep it afloat. Thomas had offered security, respectability, and what she'd believed was love. "I should have seen it," she whispered. "No," Dustin's voice was firm. "Men like him are skilled at deception. The fault lies with him alone." The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they left the main trail, climbing into the foothills that framed the valley. Dustin guided the horse with confident ease, taking narrow paths that seemed to disappear into the brush only to emerge again on the other side. "We're almost there," he announced as they crested a small ridge. The landscape opened before them, revealing a sheltered hollow cradling a modest cabin. A small barn and corral stood nearby, and a creek wound its way past the structures. It wasn't grand by any measure, but there was something inviting about the homestead, a sense of care and solidity that spoke of a man who built things to last. "It's not much," Dustin said as he guided the horse down the slope. "It's peaceful," Sarah responded honestly. As they approached the cabin, she noticed details she couldn't see from a distance: the neat stack of firewood along one wall, the small garden plot now harvested for winter, the clean swept porch with a single rocking chair. Dustin dismounted first, then reached up to help Sarah down. His hands were strong and steady at her waist, setting her gently on her feet before stepping back to a respectful distance. "You'll stay in the cabin," he said, retrieving her valise. "I'll bunk in the barn until we sort this out." Sarah followed him to the porch, uncertainty crawling back into her chest. How long do you think that will be? Dustin paused with his hand on the door latch. That depends on how quickly I can build a case against Thomas that will stick. A week, maybe 2. 2 weeks. Panic edged her voice. He'll tear the territory apart looking for me by then. Not if he believes you've gone to Denver. Dustin pushed open the door, revealing a simple but tidy interior. Which is exactly what we want him to think. Sarah stepped inside, taking in the main room with its stone fireplace, wooden table with 2 chairs, and modest cooking area. A closed door presumably led to a bedroom. How will you manage that? She asked. Dustin set her valise down. I sent a telegram yesterday to an old friend who's now a sheriff in Colorado. By this afternoon, Thomas will receive word that you were seen departing a train in Denver. Sarah stared at him in astonishment. You arranged this before knowing if I'd even agree to stay? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Let's just say I hoped you'd make the right decision. And if I hadn't? If I'd boarded that train? Then my friend would have met you in Denver instead. Offered protection until I could join you there. Dustin moved to the fireplace, kneeling to build a fire against the autumn chill. Either way, Sarah, I wasn't going to leave you facing this alone. His words stirred something within her, a feeling so foreign after months of fear that she hardly recognized it. Hope. As flames began catching the kindling, Dustin rose and gestured toward the closed door. The bedroom's yours. I put fresh linens on yesterday. Again, his foresight surprised her. You were very certain I'd come with you. Not certain, he corrected, dusting his hands on his trousers. Just prepared. He moved toward the door. I'll see to the horse and bring in some more firewood. There's food in the pantry if you're hungry. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Sarah alone in the quiet cabin. She moved slowly to the bedroom door and opened it, revealing a simple space with a neatly made bed, a small chest of drawers, and a washstand with basin and pitcher. The normalcy of it all, the clean linens, the carefully swept floors, the sense of order brought unexpected tears to her eyes. For months, she'd lived in fear of a wrong word or look triggering Thomas's rage. Here, in this humble cabin, she felt something she'd nearly forgotten. Safety. Sarah sank onto the edge of the bed and finally let herself weep for her lost dreams, for her shattered pride, and for the small spark of hope that had ignited in her chest when Dustin Drake had said, "This ticket is to my arms." The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost glittering on the scrub grass surrounding the cabin. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and the soft sounds of movement in the main room. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality flooded back. She wasn't in Thomas's grand house in Sweetwater, but in Deputy Drake's remote cabin, hiding from the man she'd married. She dressed quickly in one of the 2 dresses she'd managed to bring, wincing as she raised her arms. The bruises on her ribs were darkening, joining older marks in various stages of healing. Sarah stared at her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, pale, with shadows under her eyes and a fading bruise on her cheekbone. Taking a deep breath, she smoothed her hair and stepped into the main room. Dustin stood at the small stove, his back to her as he tended to something in a cast iron skillet. "Good morning," she offered tentatively. He turned, and Sarah was struck by how different he looked in the morning light. Without his deputy's badge and hat, dressed simply in a flannel shirt and worn trousers, he seemed younger, less formidable. "Morning," he replied, offering a small smile. "Hope you slept well. Coffee's hot if you'd like some." "Thank you." Sarah moved to pour herself a cup from the enamel pot on the stove. "And yes, I slept better than I have in a long while." Dustin nodded, returning his attention to the skillet. "Breakfast will be ready soon. Nothing fancy, just eggs and bacon." It smells wonderful. Sarah sat at the small table, cradling the warm cup between her palms. Where did you learn to cook? Necessity, he answered simply. Been on my own since I was 15. It was either learn or starve. Sarah watched as he efficiently dished up 2 plates and brought them to the table. His movements were precise and economical, like everything else she'd observed about him. I need to ride into town today, he said as he sat across from her. Check in at the sheriff's office. Gather some information. Fear clutched at Sarah's heart. Will you tell the sheriff about me being here? Dustin shook his head. Sheriff Collins is a good man, but he and Thomas are friendly. The fewer people who know your whereabouts, the better. What if Thomas comes looking here? He won't, Dustin said confidently. By now, he'll have received word you were seen in Denver. Besides, he has no reason to connect you to me. As far as Sweetwater knows, we're barely acquaintances. This was true enough. Though they'd grown up in the same small town, their paths had rarely crossed. Sarah had worked in her father's general store, while Dustin had kept mostly to himself, taking whatever work came his way, breaking horses, helping with cattle drives, occasionally guiding hunting parties into the mountains. Will I be safe here alone? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Dustin's expression softened. The cabin's well hidden, and no one comes this way without purpose. But if it would make you feel safer. He rose and crossed to a cabinet, opening it to reveal a shotgun. He removed it, checked that it was loaded, and placed it carefully on the table. Do you know how to use this? Sarah nodded. My father taught me. We kept one under the counter at the store. Good. He pushed it toward her. Keep it handy, but I don't expect trouble. I'll be back before sundown. They finished breakfast in companionable silence. Afterward, Sarah insisted on washing the dishes while Dustin prepared for his ride into town. I've left water heating on the stove if you want to wash up properly, he told her as he strapped on his gun belt. There's books on that shelf if you get bored, and plenty of food in the pantry. I'll be fine, she assured him, though anxiety fluttered in her chest at the thought of being left alone. Dustin paused at the door, seeming to sense her unease. Sarah, I give you my word you're safe here, and I will return. Something in his earnest promise steadied her. I know. Thank you, Dustin. The sound of her speaking his given name brought a flicker of surprise to his face, followed by something warmer she couldn't quite name. With a nod, he settled his hat on his head and departed. Sarah moved to the window, watching as he saddled his horse and rode away, his figure growing smaller as he disappeared into the trees. Only when he was completely out of sight did she step back, suddenly aware of the profound silence surrounding her. For the first time in months, she was truly alone, no Thomas monitoring her every movement, no neighbors to maintain appearances for. The freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. Sarah decided to use the heated water for a proper bath. She dragged the metal tub from its place near the back door, filled it with the warm water from the stove, and added more from the pump to cool it slightly. The simple act of bathing without fear of interruption felt like an impossible luxury. Afterward, dressed in clean clothes and with her hair hanging loose to dry, she explored the cabin more thoroughly. It was a man's home, practical and sparsely furnished, yet there were unexpected touches that spoke of care. Hand-carved wooden spoons hanging by the stove, a colorful woven blanket draped over the back of a chair, a small collection of well-worn books on a crude shelf. She examined the titles, mostly practical volumes on farming and animal husbandry, but also some surprises. A volume of Whitman's poetry, a dog-eared copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, and several penny dreadfuls with lurid covers depicting Western adventures. The discovery of these books revised her understanding of Dustin Drake. He was not just the solitary horseman with the quiet demeanor, but a man who sought escape and perhaps education in literature. As the day wore on, Sarah kept busy sweeping the already clean floors, reorganizing the pantry, and finally settling with Dumas's tale of imprisonment and revenge, a story that resonated uncomfortably with her current circumstances. The sun was slipping toward the western mountains when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Sarah grabbed the shotgun and moved to the window, relief washing over her when she recognized Dustin's tall figure on horseback. She set the gun aside and opened the door as he dismounted. His expression was grim, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked as he climbed the porch steps. "Did Thomas discover I'm not in Denver?" Dustin removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "No, he believes you're there. In fact, he's telling everyone he's received a letter from you, claiming you've gone to care for a sick aunt." "I have no aunt," Sarah said, confused. "Exactly. He's creating a story to explain your absence without admitting you've left him." Dustin's jaw tightened. "But that's not what concerns me. Thomas has hired 2 men from outside the territory, rough characters, asking questions about me." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Why would he do that?" "Because before you left, did you happen to take anything from his study? Documents, perhaps?" The question caught her off guard. Yes. There was a ledger in his desk drawer. I saw strange entries in it when I was dusting one day, amounts that made no sense for the bank. When I decided to leave, I took it, thinking it might provide some protection if he came after me." Dustin's eyes widened slightly. "Where is it now?" "In my valise." Sarah hurried to the bedroom and returned with a small, leather-bound book. "I didn't understand most of it, but the numbers seemed wrong." Dustin took the ledger, flipping through it with growing interest. "Sarah, do you know what you found?" She shook her head. "Evidence. Thomas isn't just the respectable banker he pretends to be. He's been laundering money for cattle rustlers operating out of the Dakota Territory." Dustin looked up from the pages, a new intensity in his gaze. "This is why he's looking for me. He must suspect I'm investigating him and thinks you might have come to me for help. Is he right? Were you investigating him?" "Yes, but not for this." Dustin closed the ledger. "I was building a case against him for assault, gathering testimonies from the doctor who treated his first wife before her accidental death, from servants who heard disturbances. But this," he tapped the ledger, "this is something much bigger. Something federal." Sarah sank into a chair, the implications washing over her. "If what you say is true, then Thomas is even more dangerous than I thought." "Yes." Dustin's expression was solemn. "Which means we need to move quickly. I've arranged to meet with a federal marshal who's passing through Cheyenne in 3 days. With this ledger and your testimony, we can put Thomas away for good." "Cheyenne?" Sarah's voice rose in alarm. "That means traveling through populated areas. What if we're seen? We'll travel at night, take the back trails." Dustin knelt before her chair, his eyes level with hers. "Sarah, I know I'm asking a lot, but this may be our only chance to end this permanently. With these financial crimes, even Thomas's connections won't be able to save him." Sarah studied his face, the earnest eyes, the determined set of his jaw. In the short time she'd known him as more than just a face in town, Dustin Drake had shown her nothing but respect and protection. "When do we leave?" she asked finally. Relief crossed his features. "Tomorrow night. We'll need to travel light and fast." "I'll be ready," she promised. Dustin rose, still holding the ledger. "I'll prepare some food for the journey. It'll be rough traveling, but I know these hills better than most." As he moved to the pantry, Sarah remained seated, contemplating the unexpected turn her life had taken. Just 2 days ago, she'd been planning to disappear into Denver, to start a new life alone and in hiding. Now she was preparing to help bring down the man she'd married. With the aid of a deputy, she was quickly coming to trust perhaps more than was wise. That night, as Sarah lay in bed listening to the autumn wind rustling through the pines outside, she wondered what her father would think of her situation. He had been a practical man, stern but fair, who believed in facing problems directly. Would he approve of her running from Thomas? Or would he commend her for now standing to fight? The thought of her father brought a pang of grief and longing. If only he hadn't died so suddenly of heart failure, she would never have been vulnerable to Thomas's calculated courtship. Never would have found herself trapped in a marriage that quickly revealed itself to be a prison. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Sarah? Are you awake?" Dustin's voice was low. "Yes," she answered, sitting up and pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Is something wrong?" The door remained closed. "I've been thinking about our route to Cheyenne. There's a ranch about halfway where we might find shelter for a few hours, belongs to an old friend who won't ask questions." "That sounds sensible," she replied, curious about his midnight planning. There was a pause before he spoke again. "Also, I wanted to make sure you were all right. Today couldn't have been easy, learning what Thomas is involved in." His concern touched her. "I'm managing. Truthfully, it explains some things, conversations I overheard. Men who came to the house when Thomas thought I was asleep." "You're very brave, Sarah." His voice was soft through the door. "Braver than you likely give yourself credit for." The compliment warmed her in unexpected ways. "Not brave," she countered. "Just desperate. Desperate people run. Brave people stand and fight, even when terrified." There was a rustle, as though he'd placed his hand against the door. "Get some rest. We have a long journey ahead." Sarah listened to his retreating footsteps, oddly moved by the brief exchange. For so long, Thomas had systematically undermined her confidence, convinced her she was worthless without him. To have someone, especially someone like Dustin, see strength in her was disorienting yet deeply affirming. She lay back down, pulling the quilt to her chin. As sleep began to claim her, Sarah realized with a start that for the first time in months, she was thinking about the future with something other than dread. The next day passed in quiet preparation. Dustin spent the morning checking his weapons and securing the cabin for their absence, while Sarah packed the few belongings she'd brought and helped prepare food for their journey. "We'll leave after dusk," Dustin explained over a late afternoon meal. "Travel until midnight, then rest the horses for a few hours before continuing. If all goes well, we'll reach Jim Everett's ranch by tomorrow evening." Sarah nodded, trying to quell the anxiety building within her. "And if things don't go well?" Dustin's eyes met hers steadily. "Then we adapt. But I promise you this, Sarah, I won't let Thomas or his hired men lay a hand on you." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, Dustin brought in the horses, his bay gelding and a smaller, dun-colored mare. "She's gentle but sure-footed," he told Sarah as he adjusted the saddle on the mare. "Her name's Penny." Sarah stroked the horse's velvety nose. "Hello, Penny. We've got quite a journey ahead of us." With the last of the daylight fading, they secured their packs to the saddles and prepared to depart. Sarah wore her warmest dress with Dustin's spare coat over it, far too large but offering welcome protection against the chill night air. "Stay close," Dustin instructed as they mounted. "The trail's narrow in places, and we'll be riding without much light once the moon sets." They set off, leaving the safety of the cabin behind. Dustin led the way, his broad shoulders a reassuring silhouette against the darkening sky. Sarah followed, acutely aware of every sound in the surrounding wilderness: the hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a coyote, the creaking of saddle leather. For the first hour, they rode in silence, climbing higher into the foothills before turning south along a ridge that Dustin claimed would keep them well away from the main trails. The moon rose, casting silver light across the landscape and illuminating their path. "Are you doing all right?" Dustin called back softly. "Yes," Sarah answered, though her legs were already aching from the unaccustomed riding. As the night deepened, the temperature dropped further. Sarah pulled Dustin's coat tighter around her, grateful for its weight and the lingering scent of wood smoke that clung to the fabric. They stopped briefly at midnight to rest the horses and drink from a small stream. Sarah stamped her feet and rubbed her arms, trying to restore circulation. "Here," Dustin said, offering a small flask. "It's not fancy, just whiskey, but it will warm you." Sarah hesitated only briefly before accepting it. The liquor burned a fiery path down her throat, but the spreading warmth was worth the momentary discomfort. "Thank you," she said, returning the flask. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and even in the dim light, she could see Dustin's gaze intensify at the contact. "We should keep moving," he said after a moment, his voice rougher than before. "There's a sheltered hollow about 2 hours ahead where we can rest until dawn." They remounted and continued their journey. The moon had set, leaving only starlight to guide their way. Dustin led them confidently through the darkness, occasionally reaching back to make sure Sarah was still close behind. True to his word, they reached a small, protected hollow nestled between rock formations. A stream trickled nearby, and scattered pines offered additional shelter from the wind. "We'll rest here," Dustin announced, dismounting and helping Sarah down from her horse. Her legs nearly buckled as her feet touched the ground, stiff from hours in the saddle. Dustin's hands remained at her waist, steadying her until she found her balance. "Thank you," she murmured, suddenly aware of how close they stood. He released her and stepped back. "I'll see to the horses. Why don't you try to get some rest?" Sarah nodded gratefully and moved to where Dustin had indicated, a relatively flat area beneath an overhanging rock. She spread one of the blankets they'd brought and sat, wrapping another around her shoulders. The night was eerily beautiful, with thousands of stars glittering overhead in the vast Wyoming sky. Sarah watched as Dustin efficiently cared for the horses, removing their saddles and rubbing them down before securing them to a nearby pine. When he joined her, he brought their saddlebags and another blanket. "It'll get colder before dawn," he explained, settling a few feet away. "Try to get some sleep. I'll keep watch." "Shouldn't you rest too?" she asked. "I'll manage." His profile was stern in the starlight. "Years of cattle drives taught me to function on little sleep." Sarah wanted to insist, but exhaustion was overtaking her. She lay down, pulling the blanket tighter, and closed her eyes. Despite her discomfort and anxiety, the rhythmic sounds of the horses and Dustin's steady presence nearby lulled her towards sleep. She was almost gone when she felt something warm being tucked around her. Dustin had silently added his own blanket to hers. The simple act of kindness brought tears to her eyes that she was too tired to fight. When Sarah woke, the sky was lightening with the first hints of dawn. She blinked, disoriented, then sat up quickly as memory returned. Dustin was already awake, or perhaps had never slept, tending a small, nearly smokeless fire where a pot of coffee was brewing. "Morning," he greeted her. "Thought you might appreciate something warm before we start riding again." "That smells wonderful," she admitted, running a hand through her tangled hair. "How long until we reach your friend's ranch?" "If we keep a steady pace, by nightfall." Dustin handed her a tin cup of the steaming coffee. "How are you feeling? Saddle sore?" Sarah shifted, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. "A bit, but I'll manage." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. Spoken like a true pioneer woman. They ate a quick breakfast of jerky and hardtack, then packed up camp as the sun rose fully above the eastern horizon. The horses seemed refreshed after their rest, and soon they were underway again. The day's journey took them through increasingly rugged terrain, steep ravines, dense pine forests, and rocky outcroppings that would have been impassable without Dustin's intimate knowledge of the land. They spoke little, saving their energy for the difficult ride, but the silence between them was comfortable rather than strained. By mid-afternoon, they had descended from the high country into a broad valley dotted with aspens. Their golden leaves shimmered in the autumn sunlight, creating a scene so beautiful it momentarily took Sarah's breath away. "My mother loved aspen trees," Dustin said unexpectedly, breaking the long silence. "Said they reminded her of home wherever that was. She never told me much about her past." Sarah studied his profile, touched by this rare personal disclosure. "She must have been a strong woman to raise you alone." A shadow crossed his face. "She was, until my father broke her." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Sarah waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. "He found us when I was 14, Dustin continued after a moment, his voice flat. "Tracked us down after years of searching. My mother thought we'd escaped him for good." "What happened?" Sarah asked gently when he fell silent. Dustin's hands tightened on the reins. He seemed changed at first, repentant. He courted her properly this time with gifts and promises. Convinced her to marry him legally. His jaw clenched. 2 months later, the beatings started again. Sarah's heart ached for the boy he had been. "I'm so sorry, Dustin." She died the following year. Fell down the stairs. According to him, bitterness edged his words. "The doctor knew better but wouldn't contradict a man of my father's standing. 3 days after her funeral, I put a knife to my father's throat while he slept and told him if he ever came near me again, I'd finish what I started." He turned to meet her gaze, his eyes haunted. "That's why I became a deputy, Sarah. That's why I noticed the signs with Thomas. I've seen this story before, and I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again." Sarah was speechless, moved by his confession and the depth of pain it revealed. Before she could formulate a response, Dustin suddenly raised his hand in warning, his posture instantly alert. "What is it?" she whispered, fear clutching at her heart. "Riders," he said quietly, "coming up from the south. Stay close to me." They urged their horses into a stand of trees, concealing themselves among the thick trunks. Sarah held her breath as the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. "3 men," Dustin murmured, his hand resting on his holstered revolver. "Could be innocent travelers, but I don't like the timing." The riders came into view on the trail, below them hard-faced men with the weathered look of those who lived rough. One wore a distinctive red bandana around his neck. "Those are Thomas's hired men," Dustin whispered. "I recognized the one with the bandana from town." Sarah's pulse quickened. "How did they find us? I thought we were taking trails only you knew." "Someone must have talked." Dustin's expression hardened. "We need to move, quickly and quietly, if they pick up our trail." He left the sentence unfinished, but Sarah understood the implication. They backed their horses deeper into the trees, then circled around to a different trail leading west. "This will add hours to our journey," Dustin explained as they rode at a brisk pace. "But it's better than a confrontation. There are 3 of them, and they look like men who don't ask questions before shooting." The detour forced them through even more difficult terrain, narrow paths along steep slopes, dense underbrush that scratched at their clothes and faces, streams that had to be carefully forded. By late afternoon, Sarah was exhausted, her body aching from the punishing ride. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, Dustin finally called a halt. "We need to rest the horses," he said, dismounting stiffly. "And you look ready to drop from that saddle." Sarah didn't argue as he helped her down. Her legs nearly gave way, and she would have fallen if Dustin hadn't caught her against his chest. "I'm sorry," she murmured, embarrassed by her weakness. "Just tired." "You've ridden harder than most men I know could manage," he said, his voice warm with admiration. "Rest here while I scout ahead." He helped her to a fallen log before disappearing into the trees. Sarah closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of complete stillness. Every muscle in her body protested the day's exertion, and tension had formed a tight knot between her shoulder blades. Dustin returned within minutes, his expression grim. "We've got trouble. There's smoke rising from the direction of Jim's ranch." Alarm jolted through Sarah. "A fire? Maybe." His tone suggested he feared worse. "Change of plans. We can't risk going there now. There's an old line shack about 3 miles west where we can spend the night. Tomorrow we'll need to push straight through to Cheyenne." The prospect of more riding made Sarah want to weep, but she nodded resolutely. "I can manage." Dustin studied her for a long moment, then reached into his saddlebag. "Here," he said, offering her a small cloth-wrapped bundle. "Pemmican. Not delicious, but it'll give you strength." The mixture of dried meat, fat, and berries was indeed unappealing, but Sarah ate gratefully, washing it down with water from Dustin's canteen. The food revived her enough to continue their journey as the last light faded from the sky. They rode in tense silence, both aware that Thomas's men might be anywhere in the surrounding wilderness. Dustin led them on a meandering route that seemed designed to confuse any possible pursuit, doubling back occasionally and crossing rocky ground that would leave minimal tracks. The line shack, when they finally reached it, was little more than 4 walls and a roof, a crude shelter used by cowboys during roundups. The door hung crooked on leather hinges, and the single window was covered with oilskin instead of glass. "It's not much," Dustin apologized as they dismounted. "But it's shelter." Inside, the shack contained a rusted stove, a rough wooden table with a single 3-legged stool, and a narrow platform covered with ancient straw that served as a bed. The floor was packed earth, and cobwebs festooned the corners. "I'll tend to the horses," Dustin said after surveying the dismal accommodations. "Why don't you try to make it more habitable in here?" Sarah nodded, too exhausted to speak. When Dustin left, she set about sweeping away the worst of the cobwebs with a pine branch and shaking the dust from the single threadbare blanket folded on the bed platform. The stove, miraculously, still functioned, and she soon had a small fire burning, its warmth a welcome relief against the night's deepening chill. Dustin returned with their saddlebags and a handful of kindling for the stove. "I've hidden the horses in a thicket behind the shack," he explained. "If anyone comes by, they won't spot them immediately." He set about preparing a meager supper from their dwindling supplies while Sarah hung her shawl over the window for additional privacy. The domestic scene might have been almost pleasant under different circumstances: the crackling fire, the shared meal, the sense of partnership in their journey. "We should reach Cheyenne by tomorrow evening if we leave at first light," Dustin said as they ate. "The federal marshal will be there until the following morning." "And then?" Sarah asked. The question had been weighing on her mind. "What happens after Thomas is arrested?" Dustin considered her thoughtfully. "That depends on you. You could return to Sweetwater once it's safe, perhaps reclaim your father's store. Or you might prefer a fresh start elsewhere." The idea of returning to Sweetwater held little appeal for Sarah. Too many painful memories resided there. Too many people who had watched her marriage disintegrate without offering help. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything has happened so quickly. I haven't had time to think beyond escape." "You don't have to decide now," Dustin said gently. "One step at a time." After they finished eating, an awkward silence fell as they contemplated the sleeping arrangements. The bed platform was barely wide enough for one person, let alone two. "Take the bed," Dustin said firmly. "I'll sleep by the stove." Sarah wanted to protest but was too exhausted to argue. She removed her boots and outer clothing, then slipped under the thin blanket while Dustin politely turned his back. "Dustin," she said as he settled on the floor with his saddle as a pillow, "thank you for everything." In the dim light from the stove, she saw his profile soften. "Get some sleep, Sarah. Tomorrow's another long day." Despite her fatigue, sleep eluded Sarah. The platform was hard beneath her, and her mind raced with thoughts of Thomas's men searching for them, of the dangerous journey still ahead, of what her future might hold once this ordeal ended. The temperature dropped steadily as the night deepened. The stove's warmth reached Sarah only faintly, and soon she was shivering beneath the inadequate blanket. She tried to remain silent, not wanting to disturb Dustin, but her teeth began to chatter audibly. "Sarah?" Dustin's voice came from the darkness. "Are you all right?" Just cold," she managed. She heard him rise and move about in the darkness. Moments later, something heavy and warm settled over his coat. "Better?" he asked, his voice closer than before. "Yes, but what about you?" "I've spent colder nights on cattle drives," he assured her. Still, she could hear him settling back on the hard-packed earth, and guilt nagged at her. After a brief internal struggle, she made a decision. "Dustin," she said hesitantly, "this platform is wide enough for two if we're careful, and it would be warmer for both of us." The silence that followed her suggestion stretched so long she began to regret speaking. Then she heard him move, approaching the bed. "Are you sure?" His voice was carefully neutral. "Yes," she whispered. "It's practical, nothing more." She shifted to make room as Dustin eased himself onto the narrow platform beside her. He lay rigid, maintaining a sliver of space between them, but his body heat immediately began warming the small cocoon created by the blanket and coat. "Better?" he asked, his breath stirring her hair. "Yes," she admitted. "Thank you." Neither spoke again, but Sarah was acutely aware of his presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solidity of his frame beside her, the faint scent of leather and pine that clung to him. Gradually, the warmth and exhaustion overcame her anxiety, and she drifted towards sleep. Just before consciousness slipped away, she felt Dustin's hand gently cover hers where it lay between them, a simple, protective gesture that followed her into her dreams. Sarah woke to gray dawn light filtering through the oilskin window. For a moment, she lay disoriented, aware only of unusual warmth and a steady heartbeat beneath her cheek. During the night, she had unconsciously curled against Dustin's side, her head resting on his chest, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders. Mortification flooded her as she carefully extracted herself, trying not to wake him. But Dustin's eyes opened immediately, alert despite the early hour. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, sitting up and smoothing her rumpled hair. "I didn't mean to." "No need for apologies," he interrupted gently, rising from the platform. "It was cold. Seeking warmth is natural." Though his words were matter-of-fact, something in his eyes, a softness, a longing quickly masked, made Sarah's heart beat faster. She looked away, suddenly flustered. "We should get moving," Dustin said, reaching for his boots. "Long ride ahead." They prepared for departure in efficient silence, eating a hasty breakfast and packing their few belongings. Outside, the morning was crisp and clear, with a light frost silvering the surrounding vegetation. As Dustin saddled the horses, Sarah stood watching the sunrise painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Despite the danger still facing them, despite the uncertainty of her future, she felt an unexpected sense of peace in this quiet moment. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Dustin said, coming to stand beside her. Yes, she agreed softly. In all the fear and confusion of the past days, I'd almost forgotten there was still beauty in the world. His eyes were on her profile rather than the sunrise. Some things are too beautiful to be forgotten, he murmured. Before Sarah could respond to this unexpected sentiment, a twig snapped in the nearby trees. Dustin's hand immediately went to his holster as he stepped in front of her. "Get behind the shack," he ordered in a low, urgent voice. Heart pounding, Sarah obeyed, pressing herself against the rough wooden wall. She heard Dustin moving cautiously toward the source of the sound, his footsteps nearly silent on the frosted ground. Long, tense moments passed. Then Dustin's voice called out, relieved, "It's just a deer. We're safe." Sarah sagged against the wall, weak with relief. When Dustin returned to her side, his expression was grave. "We need to be more careful," he said. "Next time it might not be wildlife." They mounted quickly and set off, pushing the horses harder than before. The trail to Cheyenne would take them through more exposed terrain as they left the mountains behind, increasing the risk of detection. By mid-morning, they had descended into rolling prairie land dotted with sage and occasional cottonwood trees. The vast openness after days in the mountains was both liberating and terrifying. They could see for miles, but so could anyone looking for them. "We'll stick to the low ground as much as possible," Dustin explained as they followed a shallow ravine. "Use the land for cover." They stopped only briefly throughout the day, allowing the horses short rests while they stretched their legs and ate small portions of their remaining food. Sarah's body ached from the relentless riding, but she made no complaint, aware that their safety depended on reaching Cheyenne before Thomas's men found them. Late in the afternoon, as they crested a small rise, Dustin suddenly reined in his horse. "Look," he said, pointing southeast. "Cheyenne." In the distance, Sarah could just make out the dark smudge of the town against the prairie. Relief flooded her. They were so close to safety, to ending this nightmare. "We'll approach after dusk," Dustin decided. "Less chance of being spotted that way." They found shelter in a small copse of cottonwoods near a stream, allowing the horses to drink while they rested and planned their final approach. "The federal marshal is staying at the Cattleman's Hotel," Dustin explained. "Once we reach town, we'll go directly there. With the ledger and your testimony, he should be able to issue arrest warrants immediately." Sarah nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. Soon she would have to formally accuse her husband of crimes ranging from assault to financial fraud, a daunting prospect even with Dustin's support. As if sensing her unease, Dustin reached across the small space between them and took her hand. "You can do this, Sarah. You're stronger than you know." His touch was warm and reassuring, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Sarah looked up, meeting his earnest gaze. "Why did you really help me, Dustin?" she asked suddenly. "The truth. Was it just because of your mother? Because you saw parallels?" Dustin's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "That's part of it," he admitted. "But not all." He hesitated, seeming to search for words. "I've watched you for years, Sarah. From a distance, respectfully. I saw your kindness to everyone who came into your father's store, your quiet strength when he fell ill. When Thomas began courting you, I wanted to warn you, but," he broke off, shaking his head. "Who was I to interfere? A loner with nothing to offer but suspicions." Sarah stared at him, stunned by this revelation. "You've noticed me? All this time?" A rueful smile touched his lips. "Hard not to notice the brightest light in Sweetwater." Before Sarah could process this confession or the way it made her heart race, a distant sound caught their attention. Hoofbeats, approaching rapidly. Dustin was on his feet instantly, drawing his revolver. Riders coming. At least 3, moving fast. Fear clutched at Sarah's throat. Thomas's men? Most likely. Dustin's expression was grim. We need to move. Now. They mounted hastily, abandoning caution for speed. The horses sensed their urgency, galloping across the open prairie toward the distant town. But the sound of pursuit grew steadily louder. Their tired mounts were no match for fresh horses ridden by determined men. They're gaining on us, Sarah called over the pounding hooves. Dustin glanced back, his face hardening as he saw the 3 riders cresting a rise behind them. We won't outrun them, he said grimly. When I tell you, ride for that gully ahead. Don't stop, don't look back. Get to Cheyenne and find Marshal Peterson at the Cattleman's Hotel. Horror dawned as Sarah realized what he was planning. No, I won't leave you to face them alone. Sarah, his voice cut through her protest, firm but gentle. Trust me one more time, please. Their eyes locked for a brief, intense moment. Then Dustin shouted, Now, go! And wheeled his horse around to face their pursuers. With a strangled cry of frustration and fear, Sarah urged Penny toward the gully. Tears blurred her vision as she heard the first shots ring out behind her. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, but Dustin's command echoed in her mind. Trust me one more time. The gully provided some cover as she raced toward Cheyenne, now clearly visible in the gathering dusk. More gunshots echoed across the prairie, then an ominous silence fell. Sarah fought the urge to look back, focusing instead on the town growing larger before her. She reached the outskirts of Cheyenne as the last daylight faded from the sky. The town was busy with evening activity, saloons filling up, shops closing, cowboys and townspeople moving along the boardwalks. Sarah rode directly to the main street, searching frantically for the Cattleman's Hotel. Finding it, she dismounted and rushed inside, drawing startled looks from the well-dressed patrons in the lobby. Her hair had come loose from its pins, her dress was dirty and torn from days of hard riding, and her face was streaked with tears and dust. I need Marshal Peterson, she gasped to the startled desk clerk. Immediately. It's a matter of life and death. Madam, I can't just tell him it concerns Thomas Blackwell and evidence of financial crimes. She interrupted desperately. Please. Something in her tone must have convinced him. He disappeared up the stairs, returning moments later with a tall, stern-faced man wearing a federal marshal's badge. I'm Peterson, the man said, eyeing her warily. Who are you? Sarah Blackwell. I have evidence against my husband, Thomas Blackwell, for financial fraud, and her voice broke. And Deputy Dustin Drake is out there, possibly hurt or worse, trying to protect me from men Thomas hired. The marshal's expression sharpened. Drake contacted me about meeting. Where exactly is he? About 2 miles east of town, Sarah said, pulling the ledger from her saddlebag. We were pursued. He stayed behind to hold them off while I brought you this. Peterson took the ledger, flipping through it quickly. His eyebrows rose as he scanned the entries. This is serious evidence, he acknowledged. Wait here. He strode to the desk, issuing rapid orders to the clerk. Within minutes, 6 armed men had gathered in the lobby, deputies and local lawmen responding to the marshal's call. Mrs. Blackwell will remain here under protection, Peterson announced. The rest of you come with me. We've got a deputy in trouble and criminals to apprehend. Sarah wanted desperately to accompany them, but exhaustion and reason prevailed. She sank into a chair in the lobby, trembling with fatigue and worry. Can I get you anything, madam? A young desk clerk asked kindly. Some tea, perhaps? She nodded gratefully, too drained to speak. As she waited for the marshal's return, terrible scenarios played through her mind. Dustin wounded, Dustin captured, Dustin dead because he'd sacrificed himself for her. Hours seemed to pass, though the ornate clock in the lobby marked only 45 minutes. When the hotel doors finally opened again, Sarah leapt to her feet, her heart in her throat. Marshal Peterson entered first, followed by several deputies. And there, supported between two men but very much alive, was Dustin. His left arm was bandaged, and blood stained his shirt, but his eyes immediately sought and found Sarah's across the lobby. With a small cry, she rushed forward, stopping just short of embracing him. "You're hurt," she said, her voice catching. "Just a graze," he assured her, though his pallor suggested otherwise. "More importantly, we got them. All three. And they've implicated Thomas Blackwell directly," Marshal Peterson added grimly. "Seems he promised them a substantial reward for returning his runaway wife and eliminating a meddling deputy. We're sending men to Sweetwater tonight to arrest him." Relief made Sarah's knees weak. "It's over? Truly over?" "It's over," Dustin confirmed softly. "You're safe now." The next few days passed in a blur of statements, depositions, and legal proceedings. Thomas was brought to Cheyenne in chains, his face a mask of cold fury when he saw Sarah sitting beside Marshal Peterson. He denied everything, of course, but the evidence was overwhelming: the ledger, the testimonies of his hired men eager to reduce their own sentences, and finally Sarah's account of his abuse. Through it all, Dustin remained by her side, his steady presence a comfort even as his wound healed. They took rooms at the Cattleman's Hotel separate and proper, but with an unspoken connection growing stronger each day. On the evening after Thomas's formal arraignment, Sarah found Dustin on the hotel's small balcony, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "The marshal says Thomas will likely get 20 years, she said, joining him at the railing. "Between the financial crimes and the attempted murder charges, he won't trouble anyone for a very long time." Dustin nodded, his profile strong against the fading light. "You did well, Sarah. Your testimony was brave and clear. Your father would have been proud." The mention of her father brought a wistful smile to her lips. "I hope so." They stood in companionable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue sky. "Have you decided what you'll do now?" Dustin asked eventually. "Will you return to Sweetwater?" Sarah had been pondering this question for days. "I don't think so," she said slowly. "Too many memories there. Not all of them good. And the store is gone. Thomas sold it after our marriage." "You could start fresh elsewhere," Dustin suggested. "Denver, perhaps, as you originally planned." There was something careful in his tone, a neutrality that seemed forced. Sarah turned to face him fully, gathering her courage. "What about you?" she asked. "Will you return to your deputy position in Sweetwater?" His eyes met hers. "That depends." "On what?" "On where you decide to go." The simple honesty in his voice made her heart flutter. "Sarah, I know it's too soon. You've been through a terrible ordeal, and you need time to heal. But I want you to know I'd follow you to Denver, or anywhere else you wanted to go. Or, if you preferred, there's a small homestead outside Sweetwater that could use a woman's touch." Sarah's breath caught at this declaration. "Dustin, are you saying—" "I'm saying I care for you," he interrupted gently. "More than I should, perhaps. More than is proper so soon after everything you've endured. But I want you to know that whatever you decide, wherever you go, you won't be alone unless that's what you choose." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, not of sorrow but of a complicated joy. In the short time she'd truly known Dustin Drake, he had shown her what a good man looked like: honorable, gentle, respectful of her choices. "When you took my train ticket," she said softly, "you told me it was a ticket to your arms instead. The safest place in Sweetwater, you called it." Dustin's expression softened at the memory. "I meant it then. I mean it even more now." Sarah took a step closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool evening air. "I don't want to go to Denver," she whispered, "and I think I've had enough of trains for a while." Hope kindled in Dustin's eyes. "Where do you want to go?" With careful deliberation, Sarah reached up and placed her hand against his cheek. "I think I'd like to see that homestead that needs a woman's touch." Dustin covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press a gentle kiss against her palm. "It might take time," he warned, "for both of us to heal, to build something new." "I have time," Sarah assured him, "and patience, and faith that what we build will be strong and true." When Dustin finally lowered his head to kiss her, it was gentle and reverent, a promise rather than a demand. Sarah responded with the same tenderness, allowing herself to believe in this new beginning. 3 months later, on a clear winter morning, Sarah stood on the porch of Dustin's cabin, their cabin, now watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. The ring on her finger caught the light, a simple silver band that Dustin had presented to her on Christmas Eve, with nervous hope in his eyes. Their courtship had been unconventional but intentional. Dustin had insisted on doing things properly, despite the fact that she was still technically married while Thomas's conviction was processed and the divorce finalized. He had courted her with small gestures, wildflowers gathered from the hillsides, books borrowed from the Cheyenne Library when they traveled there for legal proceedings, quiet evenings by the fire discussing dreams and hopes and healing. They had both carried wounds into this relationship, Sarah from her months with Thomas, Dustin from his childhood trauma. But rather than hiding these scars, they had shared them, creating a foundation of honesty and understanding. The door opened behind her, and Dustin stepped out, wrapping a warm blanket around her shoulders. "You'll catch cold," he murmured, his arms encircling her waist. Sarah leaned back against his chest, savoring his solid warmth. "I was just admiring the view. It never gets old." "No," Dustin agreed, though his gaze was fixed on her profile rather than the landscape. "Some beauty only deepens with time." She turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the strong line of his jaw. In the 3 months since their return to the homestead, Dustin had thrived, his natural quietness now peaceful rather than guarded, his eyes clear and often crinkled with laughter. "The judge signed the final divorce decree," she told him. "Marshal Peterson sent word yesterday while you were checking the northern fence line. It arrived with the rest of the mail." Dustin's arms tightened around her. "So you're free." "I've been free since the moment you took my train ticket," Sarah corrected him. "This just makes it official." His smile warmed her more thoroughly than the blanket. "Then perhaps we should make something else official as well." Sarah's heart skipped. "What did you have in mind, Deputy Drake?" "Well, Mrs. Soon-to-be Drake," he murmured, his eyes twinkling, "I was thinking we might ride into town today and have a word with the preacher, unless you'd prefer to wait." Joy bubbled up within her, bright and clear as the winter morning. "I've done enough waiting," she declared. "Today sounds perfect." Dustin's kiss held all the promise of their future, tender yet passionate, respectful yet claiming. When they finally broke apart, both breathless in the cold air, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home. Not in a place, but in a person. Not in escape, but in standing firm. Not in a train bound for Denver, but in the arms of a man who had seen her worth when she had forgotten it herself. As they prepared to ride into town to begin their official life together, Sarah thought of that fateful day at the Sweetwater station. How terrified she had been, how desperate to flee, how certain that salvation lay in distance rather than connection. "What are you thinking about?" Dustin asked as he helped her mount her horse Penny, who had become as much hers as his in the past months. Sarah smiled down at him, her heart full. "Just that sometimes missing a train can be the best thing that ever happens to a person." Dustin's answering smile was radiant as he swung up onto his own horse. And sometimes, he added, the ticket you think will take you away from trouble actually brings you home instead. Together, they rode toward town and their future, the winter sun warming their backs and the promise of spring waiting just beyond the horizon. As the years passed, the small homestead flourished under their joint care. The cabin expanded room by room as their family grew, first with the arrival of Daniel, a strong boy with his father's thoughtful eyes, then with Emma, whose fierce independence and compassion reminded everyone of her mother. Sarah established a small school in their front room, teaching the children from neighboring homesteads alongside her own. Dustin continued his work as a deputy, earning a reputation for fairness and integrity throughout the territory. Thomas Blackwell served his sentence in a federal prison, eventually dying there of influenza without ever seeing freedom again. When Sarah received news of his death, she felt nothing but a distant pity for a man who had chosen power and control over true connection. On their 10th anniversary, Dustin surprised Sarah with a journey not by train, but in a comfortable wagon that took them to a beautiful mountain lake he had discovered years before. There, surrounded by wildflowers and pine-scented air, they renewed the vows they had made a decade earlier. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sarah asked as they sat by the lake, watching the sunset paint the water in shimmering gold. "That day at the train station, when you took my ticket, did you dream we would build this life together?" Dustin's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I hoped," he admitted. "Even then I hoped. But the reality has been far better than any dream." Sarah rested her head against his shoulder, contentment filling her completely. "I'm grateful every day that I missed that train. And I'm grateful," Dustin murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple, "that your rail ticket was to my arms after all." As darkness fell and stars appeared one by one in the vast Wyoming sky, Sarah Drake knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just safety, but joy. Not just escape, but belonging. Not just a protector, but a partner who saw her strength even when she doubted it herself. The path had been unexpected, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but it had led her home to a love as enduring as the mountains and as boundless as the prairie sky.